The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, how are you doing this evening? Welcome to today's Inside Local webinar. We're just getting a few things sort of sorted out in the background, and then we're going to kick off for our official start probably in a couple of minutes. For those of you who've been on a webinar with us before, we have a bit of a ritual at the start where we like to get people to say, to give us their names and tell us where they're listening from, and just to make sure that they can hear us and see us nice and kind of clearly during the webinar. So could you locate the Q&A module in the GoToWebinar control panel and just drop us in to say, yep, hear you, or no, it's coming through crackly, and also let us know where you're listening in from so we can understand the kind of global reach of the audience. So we got Keith Gill from Tucson, Arizona, Nikki from Denver, we got Al also from Denver, loud and clear from Dylan from Dallas, Andrew from Denver, Elisa from Seattle, Nate from Utah, we got Michelle from Philadelphia, Jamie from Denver, lots of Denver folks listening in. We have Joe Fury from South Yorkshire in the UK, Go Yorkshire, Nick from LA, Brian from San Diego, Thea from Washington. So a good spread across the US, as we always get. Ryan from Scottsdale, Ursula from San Juan, California, Veronica also from Denver. Also a big, we've got Chris Walker from Get 5 Stars in Toronto listening in. Welcome to you, Chris. You're probably not that far from Matthew, actually. We've got Ernest from Atlanta, Monica from Boston. So it sounds like, we've got Roger from Bangkok. What other interesting places have we got people kind of listening in from? We got Suli from Istanbul, Jeff from Maine, Richard from Florida. So yeah, so predominantly a US and kind of Canadian audience, but also an international audience as well. So that's great. Sounds like everyone can hear us. So why don't we turn on the recording and get started properly? Sorry, give us a second. There's a bit of background noise going on. Okay, I'm just going to turn on this and we'll get started properly. Okay, great. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you're listening from, and welcome to today's Inside Local webinar. Today we'll be discussing multi-location businesses and how to optimize for local search at scale. And I'm joined by three extremely experienced, sort of local experts, and also experts who have worked a lot with multi-location businesses. So let me give them a quick introduction. First, we have Cori Graft. Cori is the local SEO team lead at Seer Interactive, which is based in Philadelphia. She specializes in developing and executing strategy for enterprise local search accounts. She mentors team members on local search. She's spoken at various conferences across the US, including MozCon Local and PubCon in Las Vegas. And I had the pleasure of meeting Cori at a conference in Toronto last year. So Cori, thank you very much for joining us on your first Inside Local webinar. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today. Next, we have Adam Dorfman. Adam is actually joined us on previous Inside Local webinars, so welcome back, Adam. He's one of the founding members of Sim Partners. He's got 20 years plus experience in digital marketing and also in SaaS platform development. He leads kind of a production team responsible for the local automation platform called Velocity, which is part of the Sim Partners offering. He also speaks at various kind of conferences, Search Marketing Expo, healthcare, internet marketing, and he has a lot of experience working with large enterprise scale brands as well. So Adam, thank you for joining us again on the webinar. And also Matthew Hunt. Matt and I also met at a conference in Toronto about a year ago, and actually we haven't had the chance to speak much since. So looking forward to hearing what Matt's been up to and learning about the experiences he's had with a lot of multi-location clients they look after at Powered by Search. Matt has been in the local search game for a lot longer than I have. I remember we kind of got very connected back in 2009 for about the sort of first time, and I've had an ongoing interaction since then. He's worked with over 500 different clients, from Fortune 500 down to kind of sort of small independent sort of local businesses. So a vast spread of experience and knowledge will come from Matt today. And currently he is the CMO and head of VP sales at Powered by Search, that has lots of multi-location and franchise businesses. Oh, a bit of background noise going on there. That won't continue. So welcome to you three, and thanks for joining us today. A bit of housekeeping stuff for everyone listening in. Any questions, please ask these on Twitter now rather than the Q&A module, and use the hashtag multi-loc webinar, multi-location webinar, multi-loc webinar. And we're joined by Sherry Bonelli, who many of you know. Sherry is an ex-BrightLocal employee. She's now an independent SEO consultant working for Early Bird Digital Marketing. Sherry has kindly joined us today and stepped into the sort of vacant shoes of a couple of people who weren't able to do the Q&A, and Sherry's going to be handling all the kind of Q&A, all the kind of questions that you'll be posting on there. Sherry will be answering. She's also joined by a couple of my marketing team to answer some of the kind of admin questions that you may well have, and that will leave our panelists free to engage in the debate we're going to have. It is being recorded. The video will be edited tomorrow, and the recap will be written up and published on the BrightLocal blog on Friday. So if you have to disappear, or you wanted to kind of to go over some stuff that you heard and weren't able to kind of write it down, there'll be a full recap and video available on the BrightLocal blog on Friday. So hopefully you can sit back, relax, and really engage with today's debate. A quick plug for the next webinar, which is happening in April, Wednesday the 18th of April. We're discussing the best marketing tactics to help win customers from outside your local areas. This is one of the kind of key, hottest questions that we've had on previous webinars, but also we have on our blog from kind of customers. And I can't think of two better people to answer that than Greg Gifford and Phil Rozak. And interestingly, I've never seen Phil and Greg put on one slide together. It almost looks like Greg is Phil in disguise with his beard and glasses on there. So I look forward to kind of seeing how they kind of batter that out in next month's webinar. But please join us for that. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. You can see the kind of bit.ly link below where you can go and reserve your space on that particular webinar, which is April the 18th. Okay, so we've got a lot to cover today, but I first want to start with a bit of scene setting and I guess a kind of sort of high level kind of conversation. And this is about franchise businesses versus owner-operated multi-location businesses. I want to kind of understand, the difference in the models these do and how that impacts the marketing work that gets done for them and how agencies might work with them. So, but as an example of franchise businesses, something like McDonald's or KFC or Roto-Rooter, whereby there are local independent businessmen who run franchises at a local level, but there's also a kind of a corporate sort of business that helps to kind of coordinate the business and support those franchisees. And then you've got own-operated businesses like kind of Starbucks or Home Depot that own the end-to-end operation. They own and manage all the locations, and there's no kind of independent business owners involved in the sort of setup. So, Cori, let me come to you first on this. What's your experience of working with these two types of setups, and what are the pros and cons of, say, franchise businesses and owner-operated businesses?
Yeah, so I would say probably the biggest difference between working with both of these business types is the relationship that you're going to have and the ability that you're going to have to influence the marketing strategy. So typically we found with franchises, it can be challenging to be coming in as a third party and kind of build that trust, especially without anyone on kind of the corporate level that's going to really have your back on that and sort of build that trust to make sure that they know that you're there to help and not stifle their individual marketing efforts. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we face as an agency. Working with the sort of all corporate owned owner operator side of things, there are kind of bureaucratic challenges that come with that as well. But I think the relationship side of things is the toughest with franchise model.
Okay, that's great. Matt, have you got experience of working with either of these, and which have you worked more with?
Well, yes, both. I've done both, and I try to stay steer from working with the individual franchisees versus the owner operation corporate stuff, just because one point of contact's easier, and trying to educate 500, 600, 1,000 franchisees is very, very difficult. In fact, we usually recommend that if it's not in control at corporate, that they need to reel it in as a first step so that they control all of that, because it just doesn't work the other way. You always end up having sort of some cowboy franchise that wants to roll out and do their own thing, right? And we need to reel them back in and make sure that they're following sort of the rules and regulations to local SEO for this stuff.
Okay, so in that sense, do you find, I can understand certainly how having one point of kind of communication and contact is easy, but if you have the option to work with a franchise, and obviously it's business owners who are running their kind of sort of local businesses, and therefore wanting to put money in their pockets and kind of bread on the table, therefore get the best out of their businesses, do you find that corporate is good at pushing down sort of best practice strategies to them? or do you really think it needs to kind of get kind of rolled up and controlled centrally?
Well, that's a real hot button for them, like how to do that. So you have to remember, like there's a sort of like a love-hate relationship with a lot of those organizations with their franchisees. So they need them and love them and want to support them and make them grow, but at the same time they have like an education gap that's going on all the time where they don't understand what's happening, and they can get a little noisy and become sort of a challenge that way. So we know that as a problem historically. So what we do is we set them up with digital training in advance so that we can actually educate all their franchisees and answer all those questions that they have, or do something very similar, just like what you're doing today, even doing a group webinar with them that can be recorded later, that they can get caught up to understand the importance of following the rules in a certain way. So one part of it is just like educating. The second part is also just looking at like how we're going to organize this and help them achieve their main KPIs, which is always expansion and more revenue, but how that all ties together and how we track that and manage that. So there's a lot of expectation setting to begin with, as well as foundational work before you go do the work. So when you work with these types of companies, like it's not uncommon that you're spending a quarter or 2 quarters just getting their house in order of the work that needs to be done and how everybody needs to operate. Does that make sense? And we've learned not to let them lead that. We lead that conversation.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's, there's a long lead time into when actual kind of, real implementation can start to happen. Either be it a training aspect or be it just an organizational sort of understanding and appreciation of what's about to happen.
Yeah, we call it the foundation. So we have 3 stages. Foundation, the second stage is acceleration, and then the third stage is multiplication. So what we do is we tell them, hey, look, the foundational stuff, depending on the organization, will be 1 month to 1 quarter. Usually we try to go first month, first quarter, first year, right? So first month is all about planning, because planning is hard and thinking is hard. Documenting things on paper is important. Having a framework and a way to go about doing this work is important, especially at these larger organizations. It's not like working with like a small business that can just make a decision like that. There's things that we need to do and to set up, or processes on how this gets done. And then 2 is building something that can give some proof of concept and gets everybody excited and buy-in, both at the the C-suite level of the organization as well as at all the franchises, right? You need to have buy-in from both sides, kind of like a startup, an MVP. And then the third is once you have buy-in, everybody gets excited and then listens to what you tell them to do, and then you get into the multiplication stage, which is like scaling it out and making it run on automation without having to revisit it and do rework and stuff later. So that sort of makes sense. Is like that's kind of how we set it up with them.
Yeah, no, it does makes very kind of clear sense. And Adam, what could you add to Matt's comments?
Yeah, I would agree with what both Cori and Matthew said. When possible, it's much easier to work with owner-operated organizations. There's a lot more control there, and bureaucracy is typically easier to work through than a lot of the difficulties that have already been explained. One thing that we do with both, and it's even more important with franchise businesses, is make sure that similar to how these large organizations have brand guidelines, there really needs to be like a local search set of guidelines and what best practices are, what companies, because oftentimes we are not the only vendor that they need to work with. So what vendors should be allowed to work with, which ones shouldn't be? Should there be subsidies if they're willing to work with one of the preferred vendors and things along those lines? So a lot of planning that can be done at the beginning, very similar to what Matthew said, to help, if at the very least not implement quite as quickly, start getting rid of the edge cases, the cowboys, the people that are doing things that they think are having a really good impact, but in fact could be damaging the brand as a whole by doing things that are outside of best practices when it comes to local search.
Yeah, Adam, I'm so glad you said that, because like, what they understand? They understand there's a brand book. Like everyone goes, oh yeah, brand book, we got one. But no one puts down like a local SEO book or a marketing book, and they need a documentation framework on how we do that part. That's usually like step 1. I'm so glad you said that. It's true. Yeah.
So the brand book contains what, essentially kind of brand guidelines? Is it what the brands, their ethos, what does it go into?
Well, so it's, think of it as, if you think of a style guide for brands, this says you have to, if you're using our logo, it needs to be this color, the font should be this and this size, here's secondary colors that you're allowed to use. You can almost think of it as a style guide for a website, but for offline and online materials as well too, including messaging and things along those lines. Think about it from a local search perspective. It's here are companies that we want to work with. Here is how you need to title your business name, because a lot of franchise businesses, I know we're going to get into this later, spammy titles can do very well on Google My Business and improving your visibility and things along those lines. Is that the best practice for the brand as a whole? Maybe, maybe not. It can vary depending on their tolerance level for risk. But again, getting all of those locked down, just very simple things. How should we name each of the different franchise business locations? That often takes a lot of work because there's usually a lot of disparity when franchisees are managing this themselves.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, that's great. So I think it kind of gives everyone an initial kind of sort of understanding of the, I guess, the kind of pros and cons of the opportunities and risks of these two different types of organization structure. A second question, I might come back to you, Adam, on this. What are the kind of inherent advantages and disadvantages these large multi-location businesses have in marketing? The advantage the brand brings, the scale brings, and what disadvantages does also come with that?
Yeah, I'll speak to the advantages first. When I think of the opportunity that these multi-location brands have and continue to have, it really comes back to Google using brand as a signal of authority, as well as their shift towards entities. It's much easier to build an entity around your business if it's attached to a larger brand. That's a lot of additional signals that you're going to be able to do that. And that is just from a pure signaling perspective. If you take that and tack on a really smart internal marketing team that really gets digital marketing, is working with companies like Seer or Powered by Search, or these like really organizations that know what they're doing and are willing to break down those bureaucratic barriers and implement things, the opportunities are absolutely huge, because there's ways to scale content, there's ways to get that hyperlocal information out there. That could conceivably be more difficult at a multi-location level, but in reality, it's just process that you need to figure out. And then at that point, then attached to that stronger brand, that stronger sense of authority, I think they have a huge advantage over SMBs.
Okay, great. And we will come to into a more kind of tactical part of the webinar very soon, and we'll talk about how you do things at scale, such as kind of create content, potentially kind of link build in other areas. So we'll get into that. Cori, back to you. What do you think are the kind of key disadvantages that large businesses have?
Well, anybody who's worked on an SMB campaign knows that it can be tough enough to keep data consistency and brand consistency in line for one or a handful of locations. Multiply that by 500, 5,000, 15,000. It's a whole another can of worms, and it's kind of opens up a lot of problems. I think that's probably, but as Adam said, most easily addressed with process and just making sure that you have guidelines in place that everyone is clear on, that can easily be communicated, and that information kind of disseminated through the organization is kind of the best way to tackle that.
Okay, great. Matt, do you want to comment on either advantages or disadvantages?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Cori and Adam just said. I like to put it like this, the benefits of brand is that, Amazon and Walmart don't have a quality score issue. If you're talking about AdWords, like everyone clicks on it. You could be like ranking number 3 organically, and just because you're Walmart or Amazon, you're going to get clicked on. The same thing with your ads. You're never going to pay as much as a small business will, because you don't have to prove the trust of the brand, of being something that people know and trust. So brand is really, really helpful, that once you do get the rankings that you want, if you fix the technical issues with local SEO, often there's a stickiness to it that maintains it just because of that brand that's there. So that's like a pro. A con is you got to look at it like this: it's the difference between trying to steer a cruise ship and steer like a motorboat. So the cruise ship is the big brand, and if you're trying to dock it and you're off course, there's nothing you can do. It's just going to crash. There's just so many things and red tape that you need to do. It just keeps moving, and it's very hard to turn. But the benefits of working with an SMB, the difference is it's more like a speedboat. They can literally pivot and turn anytime. So it's just one point of contact, one business. Is really, really easy to change. So there are pros and cons, on both sides. And the great thing is Google's somewhat equal, and everybody has an equal opportunity to get that ranking that they want in local and in maps and 3-packs and so forth. But that's kind of like how I sort of explain it to people.
Okay. When Google made their kind of pigeon algo update, whatever it was, 18 months ago or so, did that, Matt, a question for you, did that benefit brands more than SMBs?
It depends, right? I mean, did you make the cut or not? And it also really depends on like location, because today, like the signals have changed so much. I think in the past you could have a really strong authority, but if the location is just not where they believe that you are, you're going to get a different set of search results, right? So I'll even give you an example of like for ourselves, never mind like any business. This doesn't matter what business it is, whether it's enterprise or not. Previously we had a pretty good search presence for even our own Google Maps listing. You typed in like marketing agency in Toronto, no matter kind of where you were in the city, we would show up. But right now, if I search it for us and I'm near my office, obviously I show up. But 15-minute drive away from where I am today, I don't show up anymore. So it's really interesting. It also depends on the users at the end of the day, because the ultimate validation that they're using today with like rank, brang, and all these different things is what humans actually do. And I think it changes. It changes depending on so many things. Like rural areas, people are prepared to drive further. Therefore, the radius will be larger for even like a geolocation like that. If you're in a major urban city like Toronto, people aren't good. Like they search by street or neighborhood. They don't search by city, right? So there's none of that local modifiers, as well as they just know that. So I think that you just have to look at kind of what is the personalized search results that are showing up for your business, of whether you want or not. And a lot of this stuff you don't have control over today. So you can do all the right things, but if your location's not in the right place or it's not what users actually want, you still may not have the opportunity to show up for it. So it got smaller for a lot of people at the end of the day with those updates, especially for bigger brands that had more authority and had bigger reach before, where it would allow the radius to exceed outside of that.
Okay. So brilliant. Let's move on to the next question. And Cori, I'm going to come to you on this one. Which digital marketing channels deliver the best ROI for your multi-location clients? If you're going to spend your time and budget in one area, where do you think really kind of moves the needle and delivers actual tangible, leads and sales for businesses?
That's such a cop-out answer, but it depends. I hate to say it again, but yeah, I mean that depends on who your audience is and where they're hanging out, right? I mean, I would imagine if you're like a Starbucks who has a very, strong social following and a lot of people engaging with your content, social might provide a better ROI than even strictly like local SEO in the kind of traditional sense. But I think social offers a lot of power, especially for multi-location brands, just because you kind of have that ability to communicate that larger brand message and kind of disseminate that out through through your network of locations. I think it kind of offers a unique opportunity to kind of communicate that brand promise at the corporate level, and then kind of push that to all of your locations.
Yeah, okay. So do you see there's more kind of cut through at doing social at scale because of the brand awareness, the brand values? So multi-location brands with significant brand value can outperform a typical SMB at a local level through social. Yeah.
That's a good recap of what I was trying to say there.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I wasn't trying to say it was my idea. Just make sure I understood. Adam, when you kind of analyze, kind of traffic to kind of customers, you're saying that local and maps traffic versus kind of standard kind of organic traffic. Do you see any significant difference between the amount of percentage of local traffic or locally driven traffic that like a brand gets versus an SMB, or do you think they do better in organic because there's more opportunity for the brand to have an impact and prominence to have an impact on rankings?
Yeah, so we work not predominantly, but essentially entirely with enterprise brands that have, let's say, 100 or more locations. So being able to make a comparison about what's working for SMBs versus enterprise, it can be a little multi-location, can be is something maybe I don't want to speak to. But what I would say is, and it's kind of echoes what Cori says, where it depends. I would actually say there's not. For us, what we've seen over and over again is a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of story, which means that if you are doing local search correctly, if you're doing social media correctly, if you're doing transparency and ratings and reviews correctly, and all of these things, and you start putting all of them together in a way where your social media campaigns are going to highly optimized with a lot of CRL thought of to these individual store pages or provider pages or professional pages, or wherever this is going, you start seeing the conversion rates and your overall cost per whatever it is that you're tracking towards. Could be cost per new patient sign up or cost per phone call or whatever it is that whatever the primary KPI is that you're driving for, start going down significantly. We've seen that repeatedly, and the tactics are constantly changing. And while there's these big ones, even things like when Google Posts went out, if you're not testing all the time, you could be missing out a lot of opportunity. One recent case study that we did was we, for a client of ours that has 99 locations, we created a Google Post test, and after a week or two of experimenting with messaging and experimenting with what pages to send them to and all that kind of stuff, we were able to generate 22,000 clicks in 7 days across 99 locations. So I don't know if there's a channel or a tactic or anything. It's really, for me, it's all of the above and constantly looking for new things and connecting all of those dots together.
Was that 22,000 clicks above a normal rate, or was that specifically from clicks on posts, or?
Specifically from clicks on posts, so we were tracking them through UTM. So it was very successful, and there was a lot of outstanding factors in terms of seasonality and things like that that all attributed to that, but it just shows the amount of usage that something like Google Posts, which got some press when it came out, and people are saying maybe it can increase conversion or increase rankings or visibility within Google search results. For us, it's just a new way to test and see what can potentially be done. And again, we think it's not for all of our clients. We're not seeing that sort of success, but for the right clients, like Cori says, and Matthew will always say, it depends. It can be a very powerful way to do that, especially when you connect the dots and make sure that the conversion rate paths are really heavily optimized when people get to your own properties.
Out of interest, were you pushing a similar or the same post for each location?
Yeah, it was similar. I mean, clearly there was. They were localized for each location, but similar sort of message, same campaign.
Is there a bulk upload option for posts?
Yeah. Well, at the time, I believe there is now. You can manage this, but at the time, this was managed manually through our professional services team.
Right. Okay.
So soon after launch.
Yeah. Matt, your views on the kind of which channels you see really moving the needle. I mean, do you have more sort of smaller clients as well as large multi-location clients that you can contrast?
We have some SMBs, not many anymore. But when we started out, we had quite a few as an organization 10 years back. Today, most of our clients are larger brands, multi-locations in the hundreds, if not thousands. So we really, have more data on that type of business. But we just follow the rule of this, like at the end of the day, of like what's right to do is look at what does the human want, right? So it always comes back to what, and it's different for every search result, every business, depending on what it is. Like if you are a multi-location home improvement service business, let's say HVAC or something like that, or plumbing, then Google's pretty good about even serving up a different type of 3-pack than other ones that might be for like hotels. Like the hotel you can book directly online, right? The plumbing is, you probably don't even need to send them to your website. Like Google already offers the phone number as a click to call. So like the same thing with the ads, you probably just want to click the call, right? So at least on the mobile only. I know we're getting into paid versus organic, but my point is I don't really care. I'm agnostic to all of it. What I care about is what's visually showing up. What is Google showing today, which changes regularly? And what do users want at the end of the day? Because if you just figure out what the users want before, during, and after visiting your website, and you actually really figure out what that is, and you give it to them, then Google will, not only will users reward you by doing what you want them to do, but 2, Google will also reward you, because ultimately that's the only thing that they care about. In all their algorithms, it always reinforces right back to what humans want. So I tell people, think about that. What do your customers want before, during, and after? Look at what's served up. Give them that, and then you'll make the right choices of what to invest in.
So essentially, you're in your kind of onboarding sort of phase, you're determining how certain customers want to interact with sort of certain businesses, and then you're kind of gearing your strategy to just deliver more of that to them.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's get into deeper into some of the tactics. Now let's look at kind of on-site optimization and kind of content creation. Everything we're talking about here is really at scale. How are things done at scale so they are efficient, they're effective, they're delivering really good ROI. And also, I'd like to try and start to understand, where you guys see the priorities here. How do you start to kind of order the work that gets done? Is it kind of one-off work, or is it kind of always kind of ongoing work that you're doing in these particular areas? So let's start with kind of sort of on-site. And Cori, let me come back to you on this one. How important is the work you do on a multi-location business website to the whole overall success of your relationship with them?
Very. I think you can think of the website as the home base for for the brand, for people, for search engines to kind of look to as that guiding light of, okay, who is this business? What are they offering? How do they talk about themselves? How do they talk to their customers? And I think that that's really perfect, Matt. What you just talked about is like understand how your people or how your customers want to interact with your company. What do they care about? What do they want to read about? And really like touching on those key points on your landing pages to make sure that you're speaking their language and you are kind of connecting with them at the level that they want. I think that's really your first opportunity to do that. You can get to some of that in offsite, with relationships with through linking or with third-party listing sites. But really, I mean, you control the message the best on your own location pages and on your own branded website.
And in terms of understanding kind of what users want, do you find that brands have got a pretty good, do they have a kind of playbook that you can pick up? Do they have a lot of kind of customer personas? Or do you have to sort of start off with that kind of ground level research, when you have a new relationship?
Yeah, it depends on the, I'm going to say that a lot today. It depends on the company that you're working with. Some of them have really robust. What's that? You take a pen.
Hashtag it depends.
Yeah,
that's what this webinar is really about.
I think that you're going to find some that have really robust customer personas built out, journey maps, all the above. And then you've got people who think that they know who they're talking to, and then you do some user research and really dig into their analytics and talk to people, survey people, and find that they might be off the mark a little bit. I think our goal as consultants, and certainly it's something we try to do at Seer, is kind of help people find that balance of who they want to talk to and who they're currently talking to, and then make sure that we can kind of straddle that and guide them to speaking with the right people.
Okay, great. Adam, in terms of kind of like site structure, do you have a kind of go-to site structure that you'd like to try and implement for all your customers? And I know you're not going to say it depends, but is there are there essential certain things that you actually have to get right for authority to flow through to make the most of that kind of brand authority so it flows down to a location level?
Yeah, this goes back to the original SEO best practices from even before Google, which is you want to clear, if you're talking about multi-locations, you're going to want a clear hierarchy down to those locations. And it can get complicated too, especially if you think about businesses that might have multiple different business types that they're supporting. So let's use a healthcare system, for instance. You might have a hospital, and beneath that hospital, there might be different departments like a radiology clinic, and there might be offices that doctors work out of, and then there's the doctors themselves. So it's not just, oftentimes what we found is just geographic isn't often enough. It needs to be like geographic and then business type as well too, so that everything can flow down and all the dots can be connected by Google. That's from a pure just architecture standpoint. And that's, I would say, number one. Of course, linking to that root page of wherever these directories live, and not just from like a single link on the home page, but ideally multiple links from within all of these owned assets that this company has. A big part of the consulting we do is looking for opportunities to link to these state, city, business type, location pages from as many places as possible. It's oftentimes a huge opportunity to quickly drive authority to these locations and their end landing pages as well too.
And if that gets done correctly, does that really move the needle for local ranking?
So I think that it depends. Sorry, Cori, I'm stealing your line there. here's where it can move the needle. If they just have some linking and they have well-architected pages that are already being indexed by Google and things along those lines, those recovery searches, the branded searches and so on, they're probably already pretty visible within Google and the different search engines. Where it can move the needle significantly, and by significant, it can be as much as going from ranked number 15 on page 2 of Google to number 8 on page 1 of Google, is for those discovery queries, those non-branded ones, the ones that really can drive all of that incremental traffic that they weren't likely to get before. So yes, we have seen it move the needle for those in particular.
Okay, great. Matt, in terms of like the actual location page of the structure, you know, there's also kind of best practice out there for the content for you to have on those sort of pages, the kind of calls to action, you know, enabling, you know, customers to interact with it if they want to. When you're looking at that level of the structure, do you like to kind of try to get as much onto one single page, or do you think actually it's worth having separate pages that cover off sort of separate services, or having a map separate page to the kind of about the location or about the practitioner?
So it comes down to, again, what's right for the user, but generally speaking, like as a best practice, the less steps that someone needs to do what they need to do, the better, right? Because people are usually not coming to the website, especially multi-location stuff, to get like necessarily, you know, information like how to or anything like that. They're looking for transformation. The transformation is usually to go to a location, you know what I mean, or phone it. So not always, but you know, we want to get them the stuff that they're looking for specifically, as well as just understanding who the audience is, right? There's, you know, 3 different really types of buyers that are out there. You have like the traditionals. These are people who have cable television, get the newspaper delivered, buy everything offline. And then you have the transitionals. These are people who, you know, have a smartphone and Facebook, but they research online, but then buy offline. And then you've got people who are like digital natives, who are probably like more like me, even though I'm probably the age of a traditionalist, who just do everything online. You know, they believe in like Netflix and Amazon, and so you have to know who your audience is, and then know what to serve up for them and what they're looking for in that journey, right? So everything's a little different. If I'm a service area business, then I want the phone number, you know, being really, really present, and I want to remove steps from them to have to fill out a form. So putting those things on the page that are important to them and first and up front, and making it really, really clear why they should get in touch with you now, is key. And then everything else can go below the fold, below the page.
If I can tack onto that, the rule of thumb that we always use when it comes to should there be individual, let's call them sub-pages underneath the location page, is there unique content that warrants it? And in our experience, for the vast, vast majority of multi-location businesses, there isn't. Typically, if they have a services page, the services are either the same. If they want to go into details about a specific service, let's say they're a shoe store and they do custom shoe fittings or something along those lines, that custom shoe fitting, the process, what happens, doesn't change from store to store. So you'd want to link to that to a specific page on the branded website. It's also going to help ranking for custom shoe fittings for non-local search terms and things along those lines, as opposed to creating all of this duplicate and thin content that exists beneath the page. So again, rule of thumb is typically you want a single page, but it can change. It depends, of course, too.
Yeah, and if you need some like unique content, like there's really simple ways to kind of do it. And again, you know, it's not hard. It's just like getting unique testimonials for that location, unique staff. Maybe there's something special around there. Even driving directions from major arteries to there will give you that to boost up the page, so it's not so thin. They're very, very tactile. But again, you want to try and make it so that it's scalable and even done through like automation or APIs, so that people are not involved in that process. But a lot of that stuff is, you know, still like I've seen where it has it and it doesn't have it, and I see like sometimes no impact either which way. So I think that we get obsessed sometimes about thin pages as opposed to just giving what's right for the user. So somehow, you know, the search engines and the Google bots just know when you're doing what's right or not. I mean, if a user is pogo sticking back and having to research the search query again because you didn't give them what they were looking for, then you've done wrong by them. So no more, no less than exactly what's just right for the user. Don't try and SEO something. That's like the biggest mistake you can make.
Yep.
Yeah. So Cori, just kind of on from what Adam said there about, you know, we had quite a few questions coming prior to this, like how do people create enough content around a location to add extra relevance to it and significance so that people want to link to it, or at least Google want to kind of serve it up. How do you manage that scenario where all the locations kind of do the same thing, therefore the content is kind of similar around services?
Yeah, I think both of them hit on this, that it really depends on the industry and kind of what you're trying to communicate on that page. We work with a regional gas station chain that has I don't know, they're up to 5,500 locations around the East Coast of the United States. And they do have individual station pages for every single one. Reason being that they all offer different services. Some of them have car, auto body shops attached to them. Some of them have oil changes. And those are important details that people are going to want to know. And of course, with GMB attributes, that's kind of getting pulled into the SERP a little bit more easily now. But at the time when we originally set those up, that was the best way to communicate that. But then on the flip side of that, we've worked with, and I think I might have a slide about this sometime in the next couple miles, but we worked with
jump through.
Sorry. Actually, go to the next one. So we worked with a financial advising firm that had about 15,000 advisors across the United States, and our theory was that people would actually want to get to know the person that was going to be managing their life savings. It's a really personal decision, and in this case, it was not an easy sell to get them to agree to a pilot to let us write really customized bios of your financial advisors. Let's introduce them, get to know them, make this kind of their first meeting online. And it wasn't, to be perfectly honest with you, it's not the most scalable solution in the sense of I can't turn this out very, very quickly for all 15,000. But what we found was by writing those really kind of the bios with that human touch that really got to introduce people to who they would be working with, we had a much, much higher conversion rate than on the pilot group that we did in the test group. So in situations like that, weigh the ROI, and there may be cases where it makes sense to really invest in that. As far as scaling that goes, you can either survey your people kind of at the, send them a survey, have them get you information back, and then either use some kind of an algorithm to populate pages with that, or write it with kind of actually use people to write it. We have done that before. It's definitely not right in all cases, but in some I would recommend it. Also, another way to do that is to kind of identify some pain points that people are having in trying to get that information on for your website. If you install a tool called Hotjar, which we use pretty frequently, ask simple question: did you get what you needed when you came to this web page? Answer yes or no. If not, what could we have done better? And kind of collect that kind of data at scale, just to as people visit your site to get a little bit better idea of where you're missing the mark.
That's a great case study. Thank you for that, kind of, Cori. I guess the question is, why didn't you ask the financial managers to write about themselves? Was there a concern you had in letting them loose on the site?
Yeah, that was mostly a compliance concern, I think, from the parent company. But that's definitely an option if you've got people that you trust that you can write content about themselves. You've got a review process in place at the corporate level that can sort of keep checks and balances, and that absolutely, that's a great way to kind of employ your workforce to help you out with that.
And if I can jump in, this is a little self-serving, but there's tools. Ours not being the only one that can enable these end location users, be them store managers or financial advisors, even highly compliant industries, to go in and make updates to their own individual location pages that then can be passed through workflow moderation so that it can be approved by corporate if necessary, or perhaps if not. So we've had great success with, like Matthew said earlier, about hosting webinars and training all of these end users to using our platform, and then seeing really good adoption, upwards of 86% of one business that had thousands of locations, where we got 86% of the locations to log in and make changes, whether it was choosing what services they offered, uploading a Meet the Team section of photos and staff members, things like that, to really kind of make these pages speak more closely to the client. And Cori, you said something that I found really interesting, and I completely agree with, which is that personalized content for professionals is even more important. One thing that I've said in the past, I think I heard this from somebody else. It was a long time ago, but when you're talking about choosing a professional, be it a financial advisor, an insurance agent, or a doctor, it's almost like creating a dating profile. You almost have to think of it like that, where you really want to put as much information to get whoever it is that might be seeing you as comfortable with you as possible. And that's where these taking the time and effort, especially for this, maybe not so much for just a brick and mortar store location, can really pay dividends in terms of conversion rates.
I'm totally going to steal that from you. I love that.
Take it. It wasn't mine originally, so by all means.
Question for you, Cori. Things like kind of schema.org, obviously kind of tagging up, your name, address, sort of phone number is important at one location, presumably important for multi-location business as well. But are there other layers of schema that people need to think about when using that kind of sort of tagging level for each location?
Yeah, actually, I'm probably not the best person to answer that on the panel here. So Adam or Matthew, if you guys have direct experience in this, definitely take that. Yeah, sorry, that's a little bit out of my day today.
Okay.
Matthew, I've been speaking a lot. If you want to take this one, go for it.
Yeah, sure. There's all kinds of great documentation about schema at the end of the day, and including there's pretty much every major DMS that's out there will have some sort of plugin that allows you to do the schema markup really easily. It's Google's smart enough to pretty much figure out what it is most of the time, but it's another signal. If you can give them clarity, really, really clear information, it's good. So anytime we work with a large multi-location, we always kind of break it up into 3 major sections. And the first is just cleaning their data. We call it data sanitization. Then it's, getting it into making sure that it passes compliance, data compliance. And the last one is data normalization. And once you have all the data sort of organized and cleaned up and a process for doing it, then taking that data and automating it through so that it updates new location pages with proper schema markup, as well as when you syndicate it across the ecosystem, is always a good thing. So if you can do it, it's great. If you can't do schema markup on your individual pages or website, it's not the end of the world, as long as text-wise, you have very clear information, just writing the text of address and then the address same. You don't need to write business name and then name. You can have it on there, and the phone number that's there will be pretty clear on the name, address, and phone number. They'll figure it out and know that page is about that. Now, what can be challenging is if you have all kinds of information on the same page, then you can send some missed signals that can confuse the search engines sometimes. But they usually figure it anyways, and they figure it out by users and what the users do. So they'll validate it afterwards whether it was the right information or not. So I wouldn't worry about it too much.
In terms of monitoring performance of these from multi-location sort of page or business, kind of sort of store lists, etc. Do you just typically use GA, or do you have any other tools that you employ to kind of give you more kind of control over how pages are grouped, so you can see location performance regionally, nationally, at local levels? Any of the kind of tools out there that you make use of?
You asking me?
I'm asking anyone, but let's go to you.
Yeah. We use a ton of tools. I mean, obviously for local, the Search Console and obviously Google My Business Center are key. I mean, it's directly from Google, so you're getting the feedback there. But there's all kinds of tools that you can use to investigate further on this type of stuff, and third-party tools that you can use to speed things up or do things at scale. I mean, when you're an agency, you're looking at how to do things faster, not slower. So tools are key. I mean, we invest in, I don't even want to look at the number of tools that we invest in every year. Do this stuff. It's scary. It's ever growing every year. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of great enterprise tools for this kind of stuff.
Can I add I would just want to add to that. From an on-page tracking standpoint, I think Google Analytics is good. We found better success with Google Tag Manager, because a lot of these multi-location businesses might have their own technology that they need to insert as well as other third-party tools. That just allows you to manage all of that with a little bit more ease. And it doesn't have to be Google Tag Manager. There's other tag managers out there as well too. That's the one we typically default to. And then the other thing that we found incredibly helpful, and I know Cori can probably even speak better to this, because I know Seer is known for creating massive data warehouses and then being able to access all of this data from multiple different sources and create stories and see trends and things like that that aren't just necessarily only on Google My Business or not just website or not just Facebook or whatever, but looking at all of these together. So that's something that we've invested quite a bit in, and the amount of data that we're able to pull now is exponentially not just larger, but more useful in the sense of once you start putting tools on top of your data warehouse like Periscope or Tableau or other things like that, suddenly you can start quickly querying all these different data sets and looking for trends and things along those lines and make really smartly informed data-driven decisions that you weren't previously able to do in the past.
Okay, I'm just going to jump on, guys, just because because we've got a few more sort of points to that and to kind of cover off. This segues quite nicely into kind of data and citation management. Matt was also kind of talking about the significance of data there. So, Cori, let's kind of come to you next. How important is the kind of the data management for multi-location business? Is getting all that core information clean and in one place?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of back and forth on this, but I think my kind of take on it is, as long as you have the basics and the foundations strong, for better or worse, you kind of get a little bit of leeway if you're a multi-location business with this kind of stuff. I think it was Matt who mentioned earlier that like Google gets it. You don't need to obsess over hundreds or thousands of individual citations on sites that aren't very influential, as long as you've got kind of the main aggregators squared away and the important vertical directories, and obviously the ones that your customers are going to be actually like manually going to and searching. I think those are the best ways to prioritize. I would not recommend getting down that rabbit hole of monitoring every single time that an inaccurate version of your address or your phone number shows up tied to the wrong location. It's tedious, it's maddening. There are certainly tools that can help you monitor that, but at the end of the day, I think as long as your foundations are kind of squared away on the important ones, that's kind of set it aside and move on to bigger and better things.
Adam, I know you do a lot of work on sort of citation and listing management. What's your view on, I guess, the importance of this, and how do you handle it kind of, at the start of a new relationship and ongoing?
Yeah, so I agree with essentially everything that Cori said. I think it's important to do, but it's also important not to get sucked into the weeds of, like Cori said, worrying about every individual listing and citation on every tier of directory sites or where this data might exist. I'm a big believer in the idea of fixing the data once on those top tier sites, be it like Google My Business and Bing and Facebook and directories or vertical specific sites like TripAdvisor or Avo or whatever the case may be, and then continuing to try and keep that data correct by sending those same sets of data to the aggregators and like at that foundational data layer. So that, and the way that I think about citations now and these aggregators now is, citations, as we've seen in surveys and in studies and so on, have become much less important in the overall algorithm. They're still a factor, but they're not as big as they were 5 years ago, certainly. However, these aggregators like Localese, or sorry, Neustar Localese, or Infogroup, or Factual, or and so on, all of that data is also being fed directly to these top tier sites like Google or Bing or things along those lines. They're all accessing this data. To me, it's almost, these aggregators are a very inexpensive way to send not just your information to these second and third tier sites, but also to send confirming signals to Google, let's say, saying, hey, this business exists at this location. We're not just managing it directly with you, but all these other places that you're buying data from are also saying the same thing as well, too. So from that standpoint, I still think there's a lot of value there. And that's often how I think about citation and data management now.
Okay, great.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, what was that?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Just feed it the right data first, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, sure. And is it, in terms of the, I guess, the kind of priority list of actions that you take, where does, I guess, we split these out. One is data management, right? One is understanding, where all their locations are and getting a clean data set, right? Is that almost, the number one thing you try to sort out after you've done the kind of initial kind of training and audit, or where does that sit in your workflow, Matt?
Yes, absolutely. Well, absolutely. So there's always the audit section of like, where are they at? Where's it coming from, to start with? And then it's collecting it all and figuring out a way that you're going to continue to keep collecting it internally as well too, because things change, right? Even with multi-locations, businesses change, they sell, they close. Like, you have to have a process on how you continually update this, but you need to do it in an automated way. So you want to try and fix it at the source first. That usually is the fastest way to solve it. And then if you have fringe cases that aren't getting cleaned up, you might need to go in manually and identify those and do some manual work on something like that. But generally speaking, when you're having this many locations, it's not possible to do anything that way. It really comes down to having the right system. And just like I said earlier, it's garbage in, garbage out. So it's got to start with how you collect data from the business and what kind of data you need to have, and then what the aggregators need specifically from that data, and make sure that it matches up in the right way. And then you can start the syndication process of getting it out.
Okay.
And can I just say, when working with large multi-location businesses, typically when we're beginning work with them, the hardest thing, without a doubt, over and over again, is getting them to find out where this data exists and ensuring that it's accurate and correct. I mean, it is every single time onboardings or implementations could be halved if they had that in order. A lot of times it's in spreadsheets that sit on a single person's computer, like, or maybe half the data is there and half is in this other data store, and so on. It's just, it's difficult. Yeah.
Even finding a person who's going to own it going forward.
Nobody wants to do that.
Literally, no.
Nope.
It used to surprise me every time when we would kick off a project and we'd say, okay, you've got, 1,500 locations. Give me your list. Like, you've got to know where they're at. And people are like,
yeah.
Oh, I'll go ask libraries. I'll go ask sales. There's 10 different databases sometimes in these companies. And it's, a lot of times I think that first step is just like helping them realize how disorganized that is and helping them get their ducks in a row. And then you can really start the real work.
Yeah, so for any digital marketers that are working inside multi-location businesses right now, if you're trying to push this through and start doing some local search optimization and hiring a company like one of ours, or just make some initiatives, as you're trying to evangelize internally to make this happen, at the same time, start doing the work and find out where your location information, because you're going to need that immediately.
Okay, great, guys. That's brilliant. Thank you for that and sharing those specific experiences. Let's talk about reputation management now. Cori, is reputation management, I guess, is that a phrase that most locations understand? And how important is managing their reputation or managing reviews to most of your clients?
I think it's important. I think it's something that we, as an agency, try to really push, and I think they're competing kind of different schools of thought on this, but we think that this is something that really should come from inside of the organization, kind of pushing why this is important to monitor, and also how they're going to use the data. We found really valuable to, once you start getting reviews monitored and kind of actually paying attention to what people are saying about you online, you reveal maybe some bad eggs in the in the locations basket that were kind of flying under the radar for a while. But that's not something, that as an agency we can really push to fix. I think monitoring is the first step to that, but when it comes to actually enacting change from that feedback, that's got to come from in-house somewhere.
So do you see your role as more of a, I guess, an advice and consultative role as opposed to anything you can actually take effect on?
Yeah, I think just the way that, like, my experience and the way that Seer is set up, that's kind of the role that we take. But Adam and Matt, feel free to jump in here too.
Yeah, Matt, a question for you. I mean, how much is, do you find that you're having more conversations around sort of reputation management now than you were a couple of years ago? Or is it dependent on the type of business?
No, it's a real conversation. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a leaky bucket for a lot of businesses, right? So if there's a poor reputation, that they're either going to see it when they search it, because usually most of these places, like even Google Maps, will serve up the reviews next to it, or the review snippet with it. So it's there, it's in people's faces. And then even if it's not, a lot of times, everybody today has a phone, and the next thing they're going to do is type in business name plus reviews right before they pull the trigger. So if you don't have a great reputation or even being responsive, it can be a huge leaky bucket in the business. It's a real issue that needs to be addressed and talked about. The challenge with multi-location businesses is, again, like there's so many hands that are in the pot to make it work, that you really need to try and find a way to automate the process, where it just gets done and you're more offensive about it. So it's not about necessarily worried about getting bad reviews, but just have more good reviews than bad reviews. We'll balance it out, and sometimes we'll legitimately there. Now, sometimes we can, there's some great multi-location businesses that are so good, like they'll get on a webinar and educate, and we'll teach them how to respond, and they even give their franchisees the ability to respond to stuff in real time, which is great. Because even if you get a bad review, just the fact of you like not arguing with them and saying like, hey, I'm sorry you had that experience, can you email me here, like says so much about you that at least you're responsive and that it was replied to in real time. It looks like you're really on top of it around customer support. So I think anytime that you can like wow your customers and be on top of this, it's important. And users are in control at the end of the day, not businesses. Like it is flipped. It is not like traditional media anymore. These companies are not in it. They need to get in the game and do it. So it's something that we're very vocal about and very loud about, because you can do all the work in the world and great SEO, but if there's a crappy reputation, like you're just lost most of the business. So you can't prove your value, and you as an agency are going to get thrown in the bus for it. So be very vocal, very loud, very educational, and arm them with it. Like give them the email templates on how to respond, make it easy. Just like people who are really good at doing this are people who are used to using affiliates to sell stuff. They give them all the assets they need to make it so easy for them to just go push and get it done, or automate the process altogether. Like you have an email list, here's the email. You know what I mean? Go. So make it as easy as possible for people to follow through on it.
I would just add too, SimPartners was just last week acquired by Reputation.com. So I'm very quickly diving headfirst into reputation management right now and learning all of this. It's been a really exciting thing. But one of the things that as I've been trained internally and things along those lines, one of the most interesting things that I've seen so far is there are companies out there that bonus their store managers based on the volume of reviews and the percent that are replied on a quarterly basis. So there's companies out there that are doing this at scale and using tools and processes and things along those lines that enable this to happen. And what they've seen is those, by implementing something like that, not only are you increasing the velocity of the reviews and the frequency of the reviews, which is great from a rankings perspective and visibilities perspective and so on, but you're also increasing the average rating, because at that point then you're not just getting reviews from people that are disgruntled necessarily, but you're also driving and requesting additional reviews from all of your clients. And again, you're not going to decrease, you're actually going to get more bad reviews overall, but the ratio of good reviews to bad reviews is going to improve drastically, like on an exponential scale. So there's certainly ways to scale this internally. I've seen the results of it, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and if you're having trouble getting buy-in, like here's something that we've done. Like everybody loves a pilot, right? So go, and it's really safe when you do that. So you have like 1,000 locations, or you're having trouble getting buy-in from everybody. Well, like which franchisees are the most influential, like the ones that actually like, because there's always there's like 800 of them, there's always 20 of them that own most of them and are the most vocal, right? So find out who they are strategically, get them on board with the pilots. Once you build the pilot and the case study with them, you can present it to everybody else, and everybody else looks to them going, oh yeah, this worked really well, I'm doing so much better, and they want to aspire to be like them, that they'll then start adopting those processes going forward. So sometimes it's just like looking for what's the lead domino in that organization. And just like we care about users and what they want, right, before, during, and after, what we forget sometimes as agencies is we need to look at our clients that way. Each one is unique as well too. We're so used to just like blabbing at them the recommendations without actually learning what's important to them, of what do they want before, during, and after as well too. And if you can just figure that out, then you can do it. If you can answer like the why, the what, the how, and the now really clearly, often they'll take the action that you want them to take. So it comes back to communication, education again, and just being curious and all those really important things that a good partner is doing.
When you're talking to a kind of corporate level sort of marketing department, is your kind of general advice that you want to get them to empower local branches to own their reputation and to drive more reviews and to respond to them? Do you want them to kind of push it down to the location level, or do you want them to kind of retain control centrally?
I think anytime you can remove people from the process, the better. So, yes, you want to empower people and educate them, and you want to crowdsource things, many doing it versus one is good. So yes, you want to empower them if they're all encouraging reviews, yes. But two, do you want the review funnel controlled by them to trigger it? No, you want to just automate it so that they don't actually even have to push a button. So if they get a customer, it automatically gets sent out. So there's lots of tools out there that do this. We've got Power by Reviews ourselves. There's Get 5 stars. I mean, there's tons of them. BrightLocal has all kinds of monitoring tools. I mean, if you're not using BrightLocal today, wink, wink, you should be using it. It's a fantastic tool that does all this kind of stuff and automates a lot of this stuff for companies. So the trick is remove people and empower them at the same time. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. And there's a lot of tools out there that you can empower people and do it in a way where it's keeps them within very defined boundaries. Like for instance, for review responses, you could potentially write a pre-selection of 15 different reviews and allow the store manager to choose one of those 15 different responses so that they can respond immediately, be aware of the review, take ownership of it, but still not be going off the rails or outside of brand guidelines and things along those lines too.
Yeah. And the reviews are literally a gold mine. Like what people need to embrace, good or bad, is important. A poor review tells you what people are frustrated with and what they fear. And even good reviews tell you what they want and the aspirations. And anytime you're trying to get someone to take action now, you need to be able to create the tension and stretch the gap. You need to have frustrations and fears on one side and aspirations and wants on the other. If you don't have both, there's no tension, and there's no tension, people don't buy. So you need to understand this when people are looking to click, when people are looking on your website, and even when they're in your location, you're selling to them. So believe it or not, a lot of big brands want to just like sweep it underneath the rug about reviews and ignore it and not play with it. But what they need to realize, they need to embrace it, that there's so much gold in these reviews, and even not in their reviews, their competitors' reviews as well too. They should be really studying what are the words they're using, what are the words the customers are using, what are they frustrated with, and what are they aspiring to and loved, and then give them more of that from that information. It is a gold mine. So I should encourage as much of it as possible.
Yeah, one example, there was a healthcare system that was monitoring their reviews, and what they saw over and over again, doing a sentiment analysis in terms of what the problem was a parking lot. The word parking kept coming up over and over again. And they were like, well, we just had our parking lot repaved. We don't understand why this is. And then they dove deeper and they started like responding and asking for more details. And what they found out was people, when the main parking lot was filled, they had no idea that there was another parking lot for overflow literally across the street. So spending $25, putting 2 signs up, suddenly they were able to solve for a major problem that was a legitimate one for their customers. And it really turned the tide of reviews as well too.
Right.
Yeah, something so simple that can have a pretty big impact on people's perceptions. Okay, let's go a couple more questions. We are actually running a little bit over. Let's talk about kind of link building and acquisition again at scale. Cori, do you have any tactics or recommendations for what you can do to link build, for multi-location businesses?
Sure. So, aside from the basics of the Better Business Bureau, Chamber of Commerce, those kinds of like hyper-local kind of easy win links, we tend to focus actually more on building links at the brand level and finding ways to connect the brand to kind of the geo area that they have locations in. So an example of that, we've used kind of proprietary content to build assets that then we can market and pitch to certain areas. So say, for example, you are a multi-location business that sells wine and beer, and you slice and dice your sales and say Pennsylvania is way more into wine than Massachusetts is into beer, and kind of pitching that to news outlets that then will get kind of hyper-local news outlets excited to cover that. That's worked really well, but that's sort of how we tend to approach that, is more on a content and asset-based business basis.
Okay. Sure thing. Adam, do you do much sort of proactive link building for your clients?
So we don't actually do the link building ourselves. What we will do is act as a strategic partner for them and help them create a strategy for building local links at scale, and potentially deliver webinars and things along those lines for deliver webinars with ways and examples of how to build local links. And again, using the Phil Rosick sort of guidebook and things along those lines. Are you affiliated with any churches? Are you sponsoring any Little League teams? Are there any charities nearby? Are there any educational institutions that you can go with? It's one of those things that it is hard to scale local link building. So I like what you said, Cori, about focusing on the brand. I think that makes a lot of sense as well too. But it can be done at scale. When it comes to doing these webinars, typically there's 4 or 5 just outliers that just embrace it, and you can see the results when they do. You can see the links being grown and things along those lines. But at the end of the day, these business owners or store managers and things along those lines are managing a business, and it can be difficult for them to try and acquire links themselves, or find the time or resources to do that themselves, even with a guidebook like custom handed to them.
So those webinars are internal. Again, it's more about training and awareness amongst the kind of store managers or franchise owners. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Cori, back to your kind of brand one then. Do you have particular, I mean, obviously you kind of gave us one example of your tactics there, but is your overriding sort of philosophy then, let's build links back into relevant kind of content pages for the brand and hope that the authority trickles down to the location level from there?
And more or less, yeah, that's kind of the approach that we take.
Fine. Okay. And Matt, do you have a different approach, or any examples of things?
So backlinking is super important, like super important. It can be the difference between being number one and being bottom of the page or invisible. So it's like, to me, it's a must do. The great news is this, with multi-locations, is it's really not difficult to do. The challenge is a lot of times when their local page doesn't rank, it's the difference of just needing 1 to 3 backlinks to it, okay? And they have unlimited amounts of backlinks and brand mentions already to their website, usually to the root domain, or just floating out there on their name. It's never been claimed. So the number one thing that people should do is they should just reclaim the actual brand mentions into links. Because they're a large enough brand, it's really easy to get if you just pick up the phone or email them. But get the link back to the individual local page as opposed to the domain page. And 2 or 3 of those will usually get you the rankings you want. Now, the other thing you can do is you need to educate these brands. So a lot of times these brands have a person that has a job title of like director of sponsorship marketing or marketing sponsorship, which means they're literally getting sponsorships at events already. That's all they do, is a full-time job. If you can just teach them when they're negotiating those sponsorships, those contracts, that it must include a backlink with it to a very certain page, that when they pay for that sponsorship to be involved in that, a lot of those sponsorship pages have a lot of authority. And just one of those links going to a local page that represents, so if they're doing a local event in that city, have them link to the local page instead of the root page, even though the logo will be there, like, hey, like X big brand sponsored this event. Instead of linking to the home page, link it to the local page, and that's enough to just boost it. So sometimes you don't have to do the link building, you just have to teach the marketing, the sponsorship marketing director how to get the backlink and why it's important for the local. So it's important, like you can't ignore it. And what I do is usually we look at locations that are not already ranking naturally, just with the on page and technical SEO, and then if we can find those ones that are not doing it yet, and a backlink will do it for them, or 2. So don't ignore it. It's a real thing. We call it digital PR though. If you want to be enterprise friendly, don't say backlinking, call it digital PR, and then they understand what's going on, right?
That's good.
Great, good terminology. And in terms of kind of getting links from, we talked about citations, targeting kind of core sort of relevant niche citations. Do you kind of look at the ones you use and look at whether they provide a backlink as a factor of whether you use them, or are you just happy to get a citation on them because they're kind of relevant?
I don't think the backlinks from citations really pass much value anymore. They're pretty much useless. You might get it, but you got to remember the backlinks that come from are not the domain that it came from, is the authority, it's the page authority. So these sponsorship links or individual links like that are going to be much more powerful than some shitty directory link. Oh, pardon my language. You got Tourette's.
Matt, in terms of identifying and then links at a local level, do you have any kind of specific ways that you do that? Specific kind of queries that you run or tools to identify those local brand names that are?
I think you heard Cori and Adam talk about this. Like sometimes just being curious and asking the client like who their vendors and partners are. Often just even by providing a testimonial, you can get a lot of great local links. So their personal network will often even do it, even at a franchise level. So just be curious and ask the right questions, the right order. And a lot of times this stuff is just sitting there for you. It's like low hanging fruit. We always start there. I mean, I'm lazy, so personally, not my company, but I am. So like I always like to take the path of least resistance. Like what can we do that's low effort, high impact? And let's do that first. So yes, we can get on and try and pitch journalists and do all this work and create a 10x campaign, but if there's a shorter path to it that's going to give us the results, I prefer to take that path as long as it's, you know, kosher and you know, white hat at the end of the day. So.
Okay, guys, we've run over. I've got one last question that I'm going to jump to, if I can now. What is the most important thing? Adam, I'll come to you first. I'll get Adam, Cori, Matt. What's the most important thing to get right to ensure that you deliver a successful relationship for multi-location customers?
So to me, it's track everything. Reporting to me is so important, because if you're not making data-driven decisions, you're missing out on huge opportunities. And an example of that is looking at the rise in mobile traffic and how everything, all things being equal, mobile is outperforming everything else, or is outperforming desktop by such a large margin across all channels right now. And by tracking everything, one thing that we noticed is a certain link on a page that was one of the primary KPIs or actions that we were trying to promote on the page had a higher click-through rate on desktop than it did on mobile. Even though, and actually was generating even more clicks on desktop than mobile, even though mobile was generating more traffic. So we did some analysis and we started looking at, first was getting that data and seeing that data and then saying, okay, well, what can we do about that? And then it becomes a conversion rate optimization, which I would say tails right into that, like as far as being the most important thing. By tweaking that, we were able to, by tweaking the placement and the call to action on the mobile device versus the desktop, just changing it slightly to make it more mobile friendly, we're able to increase the amount of clicks into that conversion path by over 300%, just by making that small change, which again had such massive impacts downstream in terms of revenue being generated and tracked and the success of everything. So it's always tweak, always looking for that low-hanging fruit and tracking everything.
Great, thank you, Adam. That's brilliant. Cori?
Yeah, in addition to kind of living and breathing all data that you can, I would say make friends as much as you can within the organization. It's way easier to get things done if you know the people to talk to and you can go to the right person at the right time, pull that lever, you know, scratch their back a little bit. Like I think that's been a real make or break for a lot of our client relationships, is when we have exposure to different people and different teams that actually have influence to help us push through the initiatives that we're trying to, can be a huge difference maker. So be friendly.
I've got a question for you, Cori.
Yeah.
Is there are there typically the same departments and the same people in those departments that you want to have relationships with? I wonder if there's like a nice X that you can create that says, if you're going to work with a multi-location business, go to these departments, find the person that does X.
Yeah, technology is a big one. Who really manages the website? Not just the content on the website, but the actual technical structure of that. I think they're tough to find sometimes, because a lot of times we're brought in from like the marketing side and the brand side, and different organizations are set up different ways. Sometimes SEO falls under the tech stack, sometimes it doesn't, but that's probably one that consistently pops up as a challenge, is then you end up with like brand competing with the actual technical upkeep of the website, and that's just a recipe for bottlenecks that nobody wants to really deal with.
Okay, great, thanks, Cori. And Matt?
Yeah, these guys said it all. You got lots of actionable tips there. We'll leave it at that, because I know we're just going time.
You've got a meeting to go to, haven't you, Matt? That's Matt. So listen, guys, that's great. I can wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your time. Oh, hang on, jumping around the slides there. So guys, brilliant. I found out an awful lot that I didn't know before that, and some really good examples kind of coming through from the real experiences that you've got. So really appreciate that, and I really hope you'll come back and join us on Inside Local again. We're running another webinars every month throughout this year, and hopefully kind of beyond. So plenty more scope to kind of get you back on this. So really appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Quick reminder for next month in April, it's best market tactics to win customers outside your local area. And we've got Phil, and then we've also got Phil with a beard joining us as well. Phil in disguise. I'm really looking forward to that. Please join us. This is going to be an absolute cracker, and it's going to be great. If you want to see the recording of today's webinar, it will be available on BrightLocal on Friday. So everywhere, wherever you are, please have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us. And that's it. That's a wrap. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, just going to try and stop the broadcast now. Adam and Cori, that's great. I think we are still broadcasting, actually. Where's the control gone? Stop screen sharing, I can do that. Oh well, we're still live. But anyway, guys, you have a good rest of your day. There's just a button here that says stop broadcast. Maybe I need someone who's more technical than me to take over. But guys, thank you. We've run over by a little bit. But thanks a lot for sort of sharing your time. Adam, good luck with obviously with the kind of merge with Reputation.com.
Yeah.
I hope that goes well.
Thanks.
Yeah. Cori, here's your snowstorm hit.
Yeah, dude, we've got it really picked up since the last time we talked this morning. So
Oh, really?
yeah, a couple times
down.
our power was flickering. That's you saw me kind of looking around. That's what was going on here. So I'm glad we made it through.
How much snow were you? Because usually you get what we get, and Chicago we got like a dusting, but you're getting something much bigger, right?
I'm looking outside right now. We probably got about like 7 or 8 inches at this point. So yeah, it's brutal because it's the second one back to back. We just had a crazy one last weekend that like was kind of not expected to dump very much, and we'll see if I still have Wi-Fi for the rest of the day.
Well, I hope you got enough food and water in. Cori.
Yeah, we're good,
Yeah.
and lots of wine too. So
That's the most important.
Excellent. That's what you need. So guys, listen, thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
All right, bye.